In 1984, I was playing in a World Chess Olympiad representing United States, and I was the leader of United States team. We played a match against Russia, and actually at that time it was USSR, and we played against USSR, and it was kind of very important match for us, as every match it's a little more than standing in a tournament involved there. So I was playing on a board 1 against Alexander Belyavsky, and for USSR team was not playing Anatoly Karpov, or at that time world champion, or Garry Kasparov, the competitor, because they were playing each other world championship final match. In that Olympiad, I played the game against Belyavsky. I played, it was very, very strong, very powerful game. And every year, Yugoslavian publication, Chess Informant, was naming Game of the Year. And my game against Belyavsky was presented to that prize, to the Game of the Year, and in that competition, and I came second. So the winner of that competition was the game that I'm gonna show you now. And unfortunately that game was played then, unfortunately for me, because I could have gotten that prize, but instead some player with a name of Karpov, of course it's a jokingly I'm saying some player, world champion, a very strong positional and tactical player, played this game in that same match against Garry Kasparov. That was I believe it was 32nd game of the match. Now in this game we're gonna see now, you will see no forced variations, no calculation involved. It's a pure 100% strategy. Strategy, positional play, positional squeeze, and in a position seemingly there is nothing for white. All of a sudden white started getting inch by inch, and they got control of all board, and game, no wonder game was nominated as Game of the Year. Let's look at that game. White is Anatoly Karpov. d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop e7, knight f3, knight f6, bishop to g5, h6, bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, and e3. They have played in this match, as you remember, that was a marathon match, and they had this position many, many times. So this is one of the games where they had this, and all the games were developing very quietly, and most of them, they ended in a draw. But this was, however, decisive game, and incredibly powerful presentation by Karpov. Castle, queen c2, knight a6. This is all the opening part still. Rook d1, c5, d takes c, queen to a5, c takes d, knight takes c5. Of course, white doesn't want to play d takes e, because after knight a4, they may encounter serious problems. Black is threatening knight takes b2 as much as knight takes c3, and move by white was simply queen d2, rook d8. It looks sharp, but it's not. And let me explain why this position is not sharp. Eventually black is going to take on d5, white is going to establish control on d4 square, and we're going to see very positional game. After rook d8, knight d4, black played e takes d, bishop e2, and on queen b6, castle. Knight e4, queen c2, knight takes c3, queen takes c3. Bishop e6. Well, what do we have in this position? Black has a weak pawn, white has strong knight on d4, but black has two bishops. And white does not have enough grip on d4 because white does not have dark square bishop. So how can white win this game? Normally those type of positions on a high level, on a world championship level, they all end in a draw. But this game was very, very different from those games. Queen c2, rook a c8, queen b1, rook c7. And in this position, after rook c7, rook d2 and rook d2 c8. You see that black is controlling the c file, and they have very nice bishop pair. All white has is d4 square. Now, white played knight takes e6. This is the move that can be played by very weak player or very strong player. The mediocre player would never make this move. A very weak player explanation why it can be done by very weak player, because you don't take bad bishop and with it exchange, you don't exchange your opponent's bad bishop for your centralized knight on d4. By very strong player it can be played, because if you do that you must have some very, very good reason for it. Knight takes e6, f takes e, and bishop g4. Now, let's talk about this position. Knight takes e6 was very strong move in this position. However, it would have been very weak move if black had a pawn on h7. This game, black lost only because they had a pawn on h6. If pawn was on h7, knight takes e6 would have been a bad move, because after with pawn on h6, knight takes e6, fe, bishop g4, rook c4, attacking bishop h3. Now let's talk about this position. We have opposite color bishops, but what we have here is a lot of pieces on the board. And let me tell you something, when there are opposite color bishops on board, very important to notice this. If one of the side is attacking, this attack may be critical, very strong. Here, black has huge weakness. Black has huge weakness that is hardly noticeable by average player. It's a weakness of this diagonal, b1 to h7. It's very noticeable, and you see white has light square bishop, and they will control these weaknesses of black's king. Black king is going to be in trouble real soon. And let's see how game developed. After h3, queen to c6. Well, eventually what black wants to play rook c1 and take all the pieces off the board and make a draw. After queen c6, queen to d3, king h8, rook f to d1, a5. It's hard to find constructive plan for black. What can black do? Black can never push e5 because d5 pawn is going to be hanging. The threat of white putting queen on g6 and bishop on d3 is always there, because this diagonal will remain weak for the rest of the game. And after a5, b3, rook c3, queen e2, and now maybe best shot was for black to play g6 and play king g7. But they went after queen e2, rook f8, bishop to h5, b5, and bishop to g6. White clinched this diagonal. Now they have a threat of removing the bishop back to b1 and bringing the queen in. So after bishop g6, rook f8, and bishop g6, now bishop d8. Rook d3, actually bishop d3 was played with the idea I just mentioned, queen g4 and queen g6. Black goes b4, queen g4, and now black must deal with queen g6 direct threat, so queen e8. And here, let me explain you something about this position. Black's position is difficult because of the weakness of this diagonal, but white must capitalize on it. Only way white can win if they create very strong threats against black's king. White must put the queen on this diagonal, but what squares? The g6 square is controlled by the queen, and you don't want to exchange queens because then you are not going to win. f5 square is not accessible, and so is e4. None of d3 or c2 squares are available for white's queen. White has diagonal controlled b1, h7, but they need more than that. They need to open some file because they have rooks on d2 and d1 absolutely unemployed. So they must bring these rooks into the game, and there is no open file that white can access. They cannot access, obviously, without exchanging all the pieces to C file, and there is no other open file on the board. So they play e4. They try to exchange pawns and get to e file. After e4, black played bishop g5, attacking rook to c2. Rook takes c2, bishop takes c2. Now you see white wants to take on d5 and maybe even win a pawn simply. It just open the e file something. On d5 they take and open position for the rook to participate in attack. Queen to c6 and queen to e2. And white wants to play e takes d, and queen to d3, creating critical threats on this diagonal. After queen to e2, black plays queen c5, temporarily stopping white from this threat, and now black is creating threat on their own. There is a threat of rook takes f2, queen takes f2, and bishop to e3. Well, obviously you don't overlook shots like this on world championship matches. So white played rook f1. They play rook f1, they protect the f2 square, and they are ready to take advantage of this diagonal. Queen c3, ed, ed. So you see now what was the point of queen c3. Black denies access to white's queen to d3 square. After e takes d and e takes d, white goes bishop b1, and they are ready to penetrate with the queen, maybe to e6 and g6. So bishop b1 is a strong move, and black goes queen to d2. Now white goes queen e5, and black goes rook d8. Now white in this position, well, actually instead of queen e5 there was also possible queen e6, which was the same result, maybe even more accurate move. Now here black realizes that they can never keep White's queen, deny White's queen the access to this diagonal. So they went rook d8, and now they create some kind of a triangle. Queen d2, bishop g5, and bishop g5, and rook d8, keep all their pieces protected. So what happened after rook d8? Queen f5, king g8. In the next stage of the game, Karpov is trying to repeat position several times. It's the very common pattern to make more moves and to avoid time pressure, to make more moves to the time control. So after queen e6, king h8, queen g6, king g8, queen e6, king h8, and bishop f5. So now he wants to play queen g6 and bishop e6. So after bishop f5, queen to c3, queen g6, king g8, bishop to e6, king h8. Now bishop to f5 again repeating position a couple of times, king g8, and very strong move, g3. Now why g3? So they want to play h4 and kick the bishop out of g5 and improve their pieces position. Eventually rook wants to come out to play h4 and king g2. So after g3, king f8, king to g2, queen to f6, queen to h7. And after queen f7, h4, black didn't want to go bishop f6 because of rook e1. And white controls the the e-file, and rook e8 is not possible because of bishop g6, winning material. So in this position after h4, black played bishop d2, rook d1, bishop c3. Rook has to come into the game, otherwise white cannot win this position. Rook comes to d3, having an access, threatening rook e3 or maybe rook f3 even. Rook d6, rook f3. And you see king has to come out. Queen to h8. Now white wants to come from the other side. Black is totally helpless and positionally absolutely busted. d4, queen to c8, rook f6, queen to c5 check, king e8, and here rook comes into the action decisively. Rook f4, white cannot stop, black cannot stop rook e4. Queen b7 check, rook e4 check, king f7, queen c4 check, king h7, king f8, bishop h7. Threatening queen g8 checkmate, rook f7 is a must, and now queen to e6, threatening queen e8 checkmate, and after queen d7 and queen e5, black simply resigned. Let me tell you quickly why they resigned. First of all, they're positionally busted, but there are serious threats which black cannot meet. For example, queen c8, well, threat is queen b8 checkmate. If queen c8, then queen d6 is followed by checkmate next move, rook e7, queen takes e7. So black must control b8 square from checkmating. Black must control e8 square from checkmating, and black must control c5. And they cannot accomplish that. For example, on rook to e7, white can simply win by playing rook f4 check, king e8, queen b8 check, and on queen d8, simply rook f8 check. So what else can black do in this position? What else can black do is play queen to d8, but then queen c5 check. This is interesting. Now rook e7 is forced, rook f4 check, king e8 is forced, and it's the same pattern. Queen c6 check, queen d7, and queen a8 check, queen d8, and rook f8. In other words, black is totally helpless. And interesting to notice here how everything, all the threats that white created in this position are light square connected, related, and bishop is on c3, totally helpless, and that's why black resigned. Very powerful positional strategical game by the world champion Anatoly Karpov.